I'd like to welcome now Lynn Good. She's the CEO of Duke Energy, and Duke Energy just outlined a big plan for net zero emissions to zero them out by 2050 and the natural gas operations by 2030. They also just released a big ESG initiative and report. Lynn, it's always fun to catch up with you. I'd love to just talk about the E part of it, because there's a lot that's going on with the E part and a lot you have to do and a lot of money you have to put into it. Can you just walk the audience through where you are, what you want?
Sure. And Alex, thank you. Good to see you and appreciate the opportunity to be here. You know, environment is a part of our industry and such an important part that we've been on a journey for more than 10 years working on carbon emissions. And as we stand here today, our carbon emissions are down 39% from 2005, which is ahead of Clean Power Plan, ahead of Paris expectations, et cetera, and we're proud of that. But the focus around our ESG Day and the conversation going forward is to build on that foundation and continue to drive progress. So we're committed to get to at least 50% by 2030 and to net zero by 2050 and have a clear line of sight on how to accomplish that. It's going to include retirement of coal, addition of renewables and storage, of course, and nuclear will be part of the equation at Duke Energy.
So you have still coal assets, right? How do you do it? How quickly can you retire stuff? How quickly can you diversify into renewables? Let's just put a pin in nuclear for a second because we will get to that.
Coal has been decreasing over time, Alex, and it will continue to decrease. So it's about 24% of the generation mix at Duke today, and the Carolinas will be out of coal by 2030. And so the progress continues to retire those assets and add new ones. And the pace is really driven by not only the combination of adding renewables that you pointed to, but also making sure that we're doing so in a way that maintains reliability. Making sure the transmission and distribution investment is keeping pace as well. So it is an all-encompassing program to retire the assets, take care of the communities, look at the workforce implications, look at the reliability implications, build the new assets, make sure the grid works with those new assets. And so this is a comprehensive plan that we've been executing. We've retired a lot of coal as we sit here today, and we'll keep going over the next decade.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, and this does tie in with the nuclear part of your business also, is the reliability issue. And we saw that in California front and center when it got really hot and everyone was working from home. There wasn't enough energy stored from solar, for example, to be able to keep the lights on. You couldn't get it from another state because it was really hot and they needed the energy as well. And then so we saw the blackouts. So what are some of the hurdles that you're having to deal with as you transition?
Reliability is front and center for us, Alex, because our customers count on us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from our manufacturing, from our low income, from our rural communities, urban communities. And so as we look at how we're going to retire certain assets, how we're going to add other assets, we keep an eye on reliability and we model our system in all kinds of weather patterns and all kinds of circumstances with various degrees of growth in our system to make sure that we have adequate power. And so what it will mean over the next decade is not only retirement of coal and adding renewables, but maintaining that nuclear fleet and in the Southeast, in particular, maintaining some natural gas. We are actually a winter peaking utility, meaning the biggest strain on the system occurs during the months of January and February. Typically, that peak occurs early in the morning. It's dark. It's 7 a.m. People are getting up, the coffee, getting the kids' lunches ready, off to work. And so at that point, having sufficient storage of solar is a challenge today, given the technologies. And so we see natural gas as being part of that equation for a period of time to make sure we can continue our progress on carbon reduction, but also, to your point, maintain the reliability our customers count on.
So what about nuclear? Because I feel like with natural gas and nuclear, they both became sort of dirty words in the last, 5 years or so. What's the misconception with that?
Nuclear for Duke Energy is a foundational resource, Alex, and it is a carbon-free resource. It's a resource that runs 95% of the time. And in the Carolinas, because of the footprint of assets that we have, It provides about 50% of the power today. And so for us, nuclear has to be a part of the equation as we think about a low carbon future. Because if we had to replace something that runs 95% of the time and is carbon free, I'm not sure there is a resource that would provide that carbon free generation today. In fact, I'm certain there isn't. And so we see nuclear as being an important foundational element for us. Safety is always job one, maintaining those assets in a way that they can run reliably and safely. But we're a strong believer, at least here in the Carolinas and other places in the US that have valuable nuclear resources, that they should be a part of the equation and can be an important part of the equation as we pursue more carbon reduction.
In terms of natural gas, how much of that portfolio do you want it to be? Because for so long it was considered like a bridge fuel, and then it's like, well, maybe it'll just be here to stay, and then people started hating natural gas because of the emissions. So like, how do you see that evolving?
Natural gas is part of the conversation, Alex, but to your point, it's a difficult part of the conversation depending on the stakeholder groups that you're engaged in. And I think about it still as an important tool to achieve carbon reduction. And one of the processes that's been underway here in the Carolinas is to look at what mix of resources would it take to achieve 50% carbon reduction by 2030? What about 70% carbon reduction by 2030? And what would it look like if we pulled natural gas out completely? And so that's given us a chance to really illustrate, talk about the value that natural gas brings to the system. Because frankly, with the set of resources and technologies we have today, if we were to go to no natural gas, it actually results in coal running longer. And that's not an answer that any of our stakeholders are looking for. And so we believe it's a tool that we ought to use. It lowers carbon emissions, it provides low cost power. And we also believe in investing and advocating for research and development into the 2030s and 2040s. Hydrogen, maybe carbon capture, are technologies that could be used with existing gas infrastructure in a way that would further reduce carbon emissions. And we believe that R&D is really important, not only for natural gas, but for the rest of the system to make sure we can get to net zero.
What are you learning about hydrogen right now?
We're spending a lot of time on hydrogen, and I think, as are many in the industry, Alex, to understand where it is and the development curve, how it can be used with existing assets, what additional investments we would need to make. It's expensive now, it's early in the development process, but we're not only watching it here in the US, but we're watching it around the world because there are other countries that are looking very closely at it. And we are partnering with Siemens and Clemson University on a project that is going to look at how can we use hydrogen in a combined heat and power facility that would generate it, carbon-free, and then use it in that facility in a way that would reduce carbon emissions. DOE is a part of that project as well, and we're advocates for those types of demonstration projects so we can learn more about that resource. It's a technology that could be important in the 2030s and 2040s.
Well, I love that you brought up that report because you basically outlined 6 different scenarios of how to get power and then said, look, guys, if you do this scenario, it's going to cost you $21 more. If you do this one, it's $58 more a month. Can you walk me through what that report was, why do you do it, and what you learned? It was, at least for me, one of the first times that I saw an actual number being put on a utility bill in terms of the energy transition. It was really helpful to understand kind of what was at stake.
Alex, it's a part of something called an integrated resource plan, which is nothing more than a plan for how generation could be built over the next 15 years here in the Carolinas to achieve carbon reduction, but also meet the needs of our customers, reliably and affordably. And we entered into the preparation of this work, which is pretty intensive modeling, dispatching our system, minute by minute, hour by hour. And we undertook the project within a stakeholder forum. So we brought people to the table to provide some feedback, also to share with them our key assumptions so that we could have a robust discussion about what are the various technologies that we could use to get to our goals around carbon emissions and what are the trade-offs. So as an example of this, we presented 2 scenarios on a 70% carbon reduction. One had a lot of offshore wind and the transmission necessary to make that happen. And then the second one introduced the notion of a small modular reactor. And could that be used as a technique in the early 2030s to achieve 70% reduction? And it's been just a really great opportunity to showcase the trade-offs. So pace, technology, price. It has been useful for stakeholders and policymakers and others to really understand that we have some choices to make, and we should be working together to make the best choices for our customers, for the environment, for the economy as we move forward.
What's the response been like? Because something that's come out of COVID is that there's more than just shareholders, there's stakeholders, there's the people, et cetera. What's been the response in the conversation?
The response has been really favorable, Alex. It's a first of the kind in the Carolinas. We've never presented, multiple options as we did this time. And I think our objective in doing this was to have the kind of conversation that we are having, that we don't have all the answers. We also don't have all the technologies to solve all of the problems and all of the considerations over the next 15 years. So let's make good decisions. Let's find the right trade-offs. Let's move at the right pace. Let's keep an eye on affordability. And so I think it's been very well received. I think there's been a lot of education that has occurred as part of it. And we have heard a lot of feedback. It was the result of the stakeholder feedback that generated the no natural gas scenario that was included, because we heard from stakeholders. What does it look like if you pull natural gas out of the equation? So it's that kind of, building trust, transparency around assumptions, discussions on the complex things that are necessary to make these big moves. It's been very useful and very well received.
When do you have to make a decision? Like, what do you do?
It's a good question because there are 6 options. Which do we pursue? It will go through those 6 scenarios. Alix will go through a process in front of both regulatory commissions in 2021, and they will give us feedback. We will also continue to be engaged with stakeholders in both states, looking for how quickly should we be adding renewables? What are the renewables we should add? How do we add battery storage? So I think there will be a number of initiatives moving along at the same pace to take those plans and make them actionable. And I think 2021 and 2022 will be critical years to turn that planning document into actual executable plans. And we feel some urgency about it because we're sitting here almost in 2021. 2030 is right around the corner when you consider how long it takes to build and permit things. So we're anxious to get moving and feel like we can make a lot of good progress already on something called the base plan, which is the lowest cost option. And then we can pursue some of the more aggressive technologies as the policy and stakeholder support continues to mature.
You also tied executive pay to meeting the goals. Did that come from you? Was it the board? Is it shareholders? Because the concern is that there's going to be greenwashing among companies, but tying it to pay means that's not greenwashing. That's real for you. How'd that come about?
Compensation at Duke, Alix, is always, we work to align it with strategy. So if you think about what you're trying to incent the leadership team and the workforce to do, you're trying to get incentives to align with where the company is going. And we see climate, carbon reduction, generation transition, grid investment, meeting the needs of customers in this environment to be critical to the success of the company and the strategy of the company. So to align compensation to those goals just makes sense. We're going to start with, I would say, more of a judgmental goal, which is, are we advocating for the right things? Are we investing in the right things? Are we working with stakeholders in the right way? And then over time, it may mature to specific milestones and reductions as we learn more and get deeper into this plan. But I thought it was a very good start in 2021 to align compensation with where the company's going.
Yeah, like I mentioned, greenwashing has been the accusation for a lot of companies, and that the pay really helps. You brought up storage a bunch of times, and it feels like battery storage is key to so many things, whether you're talking about cars or you're talking about storing a lot of solar energy, like you mentioned. So if you get up at 7 a.m. in the middle of winter, you can turn on your light through solar energy. What's the hardest part about trying to reimagine energy storage?
The energy storage today, Alix, is a resource that I think is going to be increasingly important. It's coming down the cost curve, so it's becoming more economic. It can be paired with solar. It can also be used in our distribution system in order to manage some of the intermittency. So I think there's a lot of promise to it. But it is not a silver bullet solution. And by that, I mean it's not the comprehensive solution. And the technology we have today basically moves the solar energy from, best example would be sun shines in the afternoon. I move it to the evening when people have an opportunity to use power in the evening. It becomes a little harder when you need to move the power more than a few hours because the technology really doesn't lend itself to that today. So my winter example, let's say the sun doesn't come out for several days. How are you going to power the morning when it's dark?
Mhm.
And so really what I need to do is move power from October when it's very sunny to January. So I have an extra, reserve for that period. So we are advocates for more research and development around battery storage, longer duration storage. We're also looking at making additional investments into pumped hydro storage. So I think it'll be an increasingly important part of the conversation. There's a lot of investment that will occur. We think it's important to the energy system. But we also believe that further advancements in battery technology are going to be important to be the ultimate, the more important solution in the 2030s and 2040s to get to net zero.
Right, to your point, you need to bridge those 10 years, hence the natural gas, the nuclear, et cetera. Good point. So talk to me about policy. What's interesting to me is that you guys did this in 2020 when there's been no policy guidance really from DC in the last 4 years on all of this stuff. What's your relationship with DC? How do you look at it? Do you need them? Can you do it on your own?
Over the last 4 years, Alex, what's interesting is that the states are moving, our customers are moving.
Mhm.
And so the policy discussion around energy and the policy discussion around carbon reduction is not just a federal discussion. I think that's important to recognize. And so as we think about the next administration, the Vice President Biden's administration, 20 to 24, we do think climate will be a bigger part of the conversation. And our goal at Duke Energy is to have a vision to be at the table, shaping the conversation in a way that benefits our customers and really allows us the opportunity to continue achieving the strategy that we've outlined. And you think about a strategy of net zero by 2050. I'm going to have several administrations to work through. The company will, right? Both at the state and federal level. And so we work to make our strategy and our investment plans politically durable. They appeal not only to those who want to achieve carbon reduction, but also to those who are focused on job creation and economic development, affordability and reliability. And we believe that our stakeholders, our shareholders in particular, are looking for us to achieve a strategy, no matter what the administration is, working on both sides of the aisle, constructively building value for shareholders and customers, irrespective of the political environment. And we believe we're well positioned to do that.
A carbon tax, though, does seem to, it's inevitable. It feels like it's going to become in the front and center conversation in some respects when it comes to the environment. Do you have a take on carbon tax? How does Duke look at it?
I think an economy-wide approach to carbon is something that we're an advocate of, Alex, and the devil is always in the details. And the carbon tax in particular, what happens to the proceeds? Where does this investment in research and development come from? How do we make sure that the distribution of the tax occurs in a way that's helpful to customers, particularly those jurisdictions that still have some dependency on coal? So it's those kinds of issues that we would be focused on as that conversation progresses. I think what's important is reducing carbon is a key objective for Duke Energy, and we have plans to accomplish that. And we are anxious to be at the table as policy is discussed, whether carbon tax or any other method, clean energy standard, all of the tools that might be evaluated closely in the next administration.
What else are you doing within the company to meet the goals? And this might seem a little granular, but it's things like making sure that there are no leaks on the pipelines or using different inputs, iron, steel, electrifying your fleet, for example. Can you walk me through the other cool stuff that Duke is doing that's not these grand, big goals, but that can really make a granular difference?
I would go first to methane emissions, Alex, because methane is something that has a lot of attention. It has an impact on the environment. And so, as you mentioned early on, we have set a goal to be net zero methane emissions out of our distribution operation by 2030. And we believe having that stewardship around the environment is an important part of continuing to use natural gas. And we will also be very active with our upstream suppliers around methane emissions to ensure that appropriate measures are being taken there as well. So methane, I would put it on the list. I would also put electric vehicles on the list. We think electric vehicles not only take carbon out of transportation, but also benefit from the low carbon work we're doing in the electric sector. And so we've been active in all of our states, working with regulators and policymakers to put a baseline infrastructure for EVs in place so that adoption can pick up hopefully over the next decade. And we see that as a win-win, not only for for customers, but also for the environment, and look forward to ways we can continue to incent adoption of electric vehicles.
How quickly can you do all those things? Because the big strategic shifts are going to take a long time. How quick can you get these things done?
So on methane, I think we have a clear path, Alix, to meet that goal by 2030. On EVs, I would say we're getting started. We've made a commitment on our own fleet to get to all electric on our light duty vehicles and to 50% electric or hybrid on our heavy duty vehicles, really working with suppliers where there aren't as many options in some of those heavy duty vehicles. And so, actively working over this next decade to really make progress. I think in our states on broader adoption of EV, the Carolinas has a goal. We've continued to invest in infrastructure in Florida. I think the issue will be, when does that really catch fire, not only consumers buying electric vehicles, but policymakers really making it a priority. And our hope and expectation is that'll be the case in the decade of the 2020s.
So at the end of the day, do you feel, and I know you're early in the exercise, but do you feel that your customers are going to be willing to pay more money for electricity even though they know it's green? It's easy to have the conversation on the C-suite level. It's like, I can ask you these questions on a C-suite level, right? But when I get my bill, I might feel very differently. And I just want to get a sense from you, like how that conversation is right now.
It's such a good question, Alix, because when I say reliability and affordability, I really mean it. And if you think about customers, when you think about customers, I can have a group of customers who want 100% renewables tomorrow. And I also have a group of customers that would say to me, I can't afford $1 more for energy because it's too much. I'm on a fixed income and therefore I can't afford more. And so as we talk about these environmental goals that we all share, as we talk about generation transition, we can't lose sight of affordability. And so we continue to drive productivity, lowering our costs, looking for ways that we can take costs out of our business, Alix, because you can't put all this investment in and just allow prices to keep going up. That is not a sustainable solution. And so as we look at the generation transition that we laid out, on the lowest cost option would be about a 1% increase in the price of energy per year. As you get closer to 70%, we see that in the 2 to 2.5% range. That is exactly the focus of the conversations, or one element of the focus of the conversations with stakeholders, because we have to make choices that keep price in mind.
It's such a great point, and I'm really interested to see how this develops for you. I know it's going to be a multi-year process, Lynn. Thank you so much for your time. I love speaking with you. I've known you for years, and it's interesting to see how this will wind up shaping up as well. Lynn Good, CEO of Duke Energy. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.